February 14, 1933, Levinson, 58 p.m. The Harlem River wind howls through dark alleys as 10 men move in silence down 145th Street, their breaths plume in the cold, their footsteps heavy with purpose. At their head is a man known only as Mad Dog, a scar twisting across his cheek under the dim glow of a street lamp. His fingers curl around the trigger of a Thompson submachine gun. Behind him, 9 hardened killers fan out, each handpicked by Dutch Schultz for one job tonight: take Harlem. They've done this kind of thing before. Enforcers from downtown marching into neighborhoods, breaking anyone who resists. But tonight feels different. The streets are too quiet. Harlem seems to be holding its breath. Mad Dog glances at his wristwatch, 11:58, right on schedule. Dutch's intel said Bumpy Johnson will be here at midnight, meeting with his numbers bankers in the basement of an old jazz club on the corner. No bodyguards expected. Easy pickings. Dutch wants it bloody and public wipe them out and leave their bodies as a warning that Harlem now answers to him. A 100,000. That's the bounty Dutch promised for Bumpy's head and for Harlem's rackets crushed. A fortune that could buy loyalty or death. Tonight it's buying both. Each of these men knows their cut will be life-changing, and each is eager to collect. They stride with the confidence of lions moving on prey. For years, Dutch Schultz has ruled through fear and violence, and these men are the teeth behind his roar.
Tommy, 2 guns.
Marino checks the pistols under his coat. Icepick Freddy pats the long blade in his pocket, grinning at the thought of using it. They've all heard of Bumpy Johnson, some uptown hustler who's gotten too big for his britches. Tonight they'll remind Harlem who truly holds power in New York. At least, that's what they believe. 11:59 p.m. Mad Dog raises a fist, and the crew halts in the alley beside the club. Above them, the neon sign of the shuttered jazz club sputters weakly. Inside, muffled jazz notes float through the floorboards, maybe a record left playing. Through a barred basement window, they see faint light, shadows of figures moving. Bumpy Johnson is in there, counting his money, unsuspecting. Mad Dog's heart thumps in anticipation. This is it. He gestures, and 2 of his men quietly pry open the side door. It wasn't even locked. They share a predatory smile, almost too easy. Midnight. They slip inside, cats in the darkness. The basement smells of cigar smoke and cash, just as they expected. In the gloom, they spot silhouettes around a table, murmuring voices. Without hesitation, Mad Dog steps forward. Thompson raised. Light 'em up, he growls. A split second of stunned silence, and then the night erupts in thunder. Gunfire flashes. Mad Dog's Tommy gun sprays a hail of bullets across the room. The silhouettes jerk and collapse. His men open up with pistols and shotguns, splintering chairs and shattering bottles. Sparks fly as bullets ricochet off concrete walls. Within seconds, the firing stops. Cordite smoke thickens the air. 10 men hold their breath, listening. No returning gunfire. No screams. Just the fading echo of violence. Mad Dog cracks a cruel grin. It's done. Bumpy Johnson and his crew must be laying dead or dying on that basement floor. They step forward to inspect the carnage. But something's wrong. There's no blood. Mad Dog's eyes narrow. He sees the bodies. Slumped in the chairs are nothing but straw, stuffed dummies, clothes filled with rags. A phonograph in the corner plays a Duke Ellington record softly, the source of the murmurs. Realization strikes too late. It's a trap! One of the gunmen shouts, voice high with alarm. Before he can finish, the single light bulb in the basement blinks out, plunging them into darkness. Heartbeats pound. From the alley doorway they entered comes a metallic clang. Someone has shut it and padlocked their only escape. Panic slices through the group. Mad Dog swings his Thompson toward the door, hands suddenly slick with sweat. A new sound cuts through the dark, the clicking of guns being cocked in the shadows above and around them. They're surrounded. A voice drifts from somewhere in the blackness, calm and low, carrying the weight of Harlem with it. "Welcome to Harlem, boys," it says. The tone is almost polite, almost. But in those 4 words, Mad Dog hears the promise of death. Another voice, ice cold, adds from their flank, "We've been expecting you." Mad Dog's crew spins toward that sound in blind fear. And then it happens. Harlem roars back. Gunfire explodes from 3 directions, raining down from the top of the stairs, from behind a false wall, from a loft overhead. Muzzle flashes strobe the basement, illuminating petrified faces of Dutch's men. Bullets tear through them. Mad Dog feels a hot punch in his shoulder as he's thrown against a pillar. Around him, his men cry out. One by one, they drop, confused silhouettes outlined in the muzzle flare, cut down where they stand. Icepick Freddy lunges toward the stairs with a snarl, only to catch a shotgun blast square in the chest that flings him back, his blade clattering uselessly. Tommy, too, guns fires both pistols wildly into the dark, cursing, until a bullet finds his throat and silences him. Less than a minute ago, they were the hunters. Now they are prey, and the hunt is merciless. The last echoes of gunfire fade. The basement falls quiet once more, except for the moans of the dying and the crackle of a broken light bulb filament overhead. In the sudden stillness, dust and gun smoke swirl together like a ghostly mist. Mad Dog, bleeding and barely upright, fumbles for the pistol at his hip. His Thompson lies empty at his feet. He manages to yank out a revolver with trembling fingers and raises it, searching for any target in the dark. A single overhead light flickers back to life, not the weak bulb they shot out. Another lamp, deliberately left off until now, hanging right above the center of the room. Its dim amber glow reveals a scene from hell. 9 of Mad Dog's men lie sprawled on the concrete, blood pooling beneath still bodies. Some stare sightless at the ceiling. Others lie face down, never to move again. He's the only one left standing. Mad Dog's stomach lurches at the sight of his crew, Dutch's best, slaughtered in seconds. His bravado drains with each labored breath. He starts backing away, eyes darting for any way out. From behind a support column steps a figure in a charcoal, gray suit and a wide, brimmed fedora. Impeccably dressed, calm, not a hair out of place. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. He adjusts his cufflinks and steps into the light, looking around at the fallen hit squad with cold, appraising eyes. Behind him, emerging like specters, are half a dozen of Bumpy's men, guns drawn and aimed steady at the lone survivor. Some of these Harlem defenders are fresh, faced teenagers clutching rifles. Others are older, scarred enforcers with shotguns still smoking. They encircle Mad Dog without a word, their silence more ominous than any threat. Mad Dog's mouth goes dry. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one with the drop on an unguarded man, not the other way around. His pistol shakes in his grip as he swings it between the encircling shadows. Bumpy watches him with a faint look of pity, or perhaps disappointment. In that heavy silence, the record player in the corner continues to spin, the needle stuck in a groove, repeating a quiet, eerie hiss. Finally, Bumpy speaks, voice soft and measured. "You look scared," he says to Mad Dog almost gently. Mad Dog's ears ring. He can hardly believe this composed figure before him. He expected a wild-eyed thug, not this calm man addressing him like an unruly guest. Bumpy takes a slow step forward. Mad Dog flinches, the gun in his hand rattling. Bumpy's men tense, but Bumpy just lifts a hand to hold them. His eyes never leave Mad Dog's. "I want you to do something for me." Bumpy continues, as if they're just having a chat. His tone is eerily polite amidst the carnage. "Tell Dutch Schultz he made a mistake." Mad Dog blinks sweat out of his eyes. His mind races, desperate, thinking maybe he can bargain. I can give you whatever you want money. Dutch will pay." He stammers. Bumpy's expression hardens, and he cuts Mad Dog off with a quiet firmness that freezes the plea in his throat. "What could I want from him?" Bumpy asks. He gestures around at the 10 men meant to kill him, now dead or dying on his floor. "Dutch already gave me everything I need right here." Bumpy steps closer, now within a few feet of Mad Dog. Though Mad Dog still has a loaded pistol aimed at Bumpy's chest, his grip is faltering. He sees something in Bumpy's eyes, absolute certainty. The kind of certainty only a man who's already won can have. Bumpy tilts his head, eyeing the trembling gun in Mad Dog's hand. "Go on," Bumpy says softly. "Take your shot, if it'll make you feel better." The words are not a dare, but an invitation. Mad Dog's heart is hammering. In a final spasm of defiance, he pulls the trigger. One last act of spite. A thunderous click. Misfire. The pistol jams, or maybe Bumpy's men emptied its chamber earlier. Mad Dog will never know. His hope shatters as the useless gun sinks in his hand. Bumpy almost sighs. He reaches slowly into his suit jacket. Mad Dog is too broken to even flinch. From his jacket, Bumpy withdraws a white handkerchief, immaculately clean. He holds it out. Mad Dog just stares in confusion. "You'll want to wipe the blood off your hands before you meet your maker," Bumpy says quietly. Mad Dog's gaze drops to his own hands, slick red from clutching his wounded shoulder. His breath is ragged, chest tight with fear and pain. He doesn't move to take the handkerchief. His mind is screaming at him to run, to fight, but his body refuses. He's done. They both know it. Bumpy nods once. "Have it your way," he murmurs. And then Bumpy Johnson, who hadn't so much as raised his voice all night, makes a small gesture, a nod to one of his men. Before Mad Dog can blink, a single gunshot rings out. A bullet punches into his skull, dropping him where he stands. Mad Dog falls among his fallen comrades, the last of Dutch Schultz's hand-picked assassins to hit the floor. The echo of the shot fades, and with it, the final groan of a man who believed Harlem would be easy prey. For a moment, no one speaks. Bumpy surveys the scene, his face unreadable, the white handkerchief still held delicately between two fingers. Slowly, meticulously, he uses it to wipe a speck of blood off his polished shoes. The Duke Ellington record in the corner has run its course, leaving nothing but a soft static hiss to accompany the heavy silence. What happened in that basement would soon become the stuff of legend, but what the world would never read in the papers. What Dutch Schultz could never have imagined was that Bumpy Johnson had seen this coming from the moment Dutch set his sights on Harlem. This wasn't just a lucky victory or a last-minute scramble. It was a carefully laid trap sprung shut at exactly midnight. And to understand how those 10 men ended up in coffins instead of conquering Harlem, you have to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1933 and what Harlem meant to him. 3 weeks earlier, Harlem, late January 1933, the height of winter and the height of a Cold War brewing on uptown streets. Ellsworth, Bumpy. Johnson wasn't yet the legend he'd one day become, but in these blocks he was already the man people looked to for protection. At 27 years old, Bumpy was the right-hand man of Stephanie St. Clair, the famed Queen of Numbers, and he was fast proving himself as Harlem's guardian in an underground war that most newspapers barely acknowledged. Harlem's heartbeat was the numbers racket, a street lottery beloved by the community, pennies and dimes wagered each day on dreams of hitting it big. Those coins added up to millions, and where there's money, there are those willing to kill for it. For years, Harlem's numbers game was run by black entrepreneurs like Madame St. Clair, who reinvested in their community, hired local runners, and greased the palms of Harlem's own police precinct when necessary. It wasn't just business, it was pride, independence. But to outsiders like Arthur Dutch Schultz, Harlem's numbers racket was just another untapped gold mine ripe for plunder. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer, a Bronx beer baron turned mobster, had made a fortune during Prohibition through bootleg booze and brutality. By 1933, Prohibition was ending, and Dutch was hunting for the next empire to conquer. He cast his greedy eyes uptown. Dutch was not Italian mafia. He was an independent, a wild card in New York's underworld. He had a reputation cruel, impulsive, dangerously unpredictable. If Dutch wanted something, he took it by bullets or by bribes, it didn't matter. And now he wanted Harlem. He figured the black gangsters uptown were small, time operators who would scare easy or sell out quick. In his mind, he was a king marching in to claim an unguarded province. What Dutch didn't understand, what he refused to understand, was that Harlem wasn't just territory you seized. It was a community that protected its own, in ways outsiders couldn't see. Dutch's first move came quietly. He tried to buy in. Late 1932, he sent feelers to Madame St. Clair and her circle, including Bumpy. Envoys arrived with fat envelopes of cash and business proposals. The message was simple: partner with Dutch Schultz or step aside. He'd cut them a slice of the profits if they handed over control. Let them become his subordinates. Some in Harlem's underworld were tempted. After all, Dutch had connections and resources, and he'd just been acquitted in a high-profile tax trial. His clout seemed untouchable. But Bumpy Johnson was adamant Harlem was not for sale. Bumpy and Madame St. Clair sent Dutch's envoys back empty-handed, along with a message of their own. Harlem's numbers banks were off limits. For Dutch, a man used to getting his way. That refusal was an insult. No one said no to him without consequence. So Dutch changed tactics. If money wouldn't sway Harlem, fear would. He began sending his foot soldiers uptown, thugs who would shake down or brutalize independent bookmakers, the small timers running bets on street corners for Mad Aim, St. Clair's operation. One by one, these numbers runners started getting visits. If they were lucky, they lived to tell about the beating. If not, they disappeared. In December of '32 alone, 6 bodies turned up in Harlem alleys, numbers men who had said no to Dutch Schultz. Their deaths were messages written in blood and meant to terrify the others. It almost worked. Some bankers quit the business, others quietly started paying Dutch protection on the side. But Bumpy was not about to roll over. He responded not with open war, yet, but with protection and pressure of his own. He arranged safe houses for the most at-risk bankers, rotating their locations daily so Dutch's goons could never be sure where to find them. He provided armed escorts for the runners carrying large cash pick-ups, turning what used to be easy targets into heavily guarded convoys. And perhaps most importantly, Bumpy started spreading his own message through the streets. Dutch Schultz doesn't run Harlem. Never has, never will. People listened. Bumpy had earned a reputation as a man of his word. Not just with a gun, though he was no stranger to violence when necessary, but with a kind of responsibility rarely seen in gangland. When a hard winter froze out work and families struggled, Bumpy quietly covered groceries or rent for those short on cash. When cops harassed a local preacher or a business owner, Bumpy made sure higher-ups in the city government got a call to put a leash on the police. He'd once paid for a full funeral for a neighborhood kid caught in crossfire when the boy's family couldn't afford a casket. In Harlem, Bumpy wasn't just another hood to many. He was a guardian. So when he said Harlem would not bow to Dutch Schultz, folks believed him, and they took heart. But Dutch Schultz wasn't one to back off. Harlem's defiance only enraged him. He escalated in kind. Soon the Cold War turned hot. January 1933 saw drive-by shootings on Lenox Avenue, a black sedan cruising past popular Harlem spots and letting loose with a Thompson submachine gun at twilight. Miraculously, no innocent civilians were killed those first times, but it was only luck that prevented a massacre. Bumpy knew Dutch was trying to make the community turn on him, to paint him as the cause of the violence. Yet Harlem understood exactly who was behind the terror, and instead of splintering, they closed ranks. Church leaders, bar owners, even some black officers in the NYPD quietly signaled support for Bumpy's crew to do whatever it took to protect the neighborhood. Dutch tried everything to break Harlem's resolve. In one instance, he sent thugs to firebomb a meeting hall where Bumpy's bankers were gathering. But Bumpy's men were ready. They ambushed the arsonists and snuffed out the flames before any harm was done, leaving Dutch livid. A week later, Dutch's trigger, men shot up the Palm Cafe, a Harlem joint they suspected Bumpy frequented. Bullets shattered the jazz singer's microphone and sent patrons diving to the floor, by sheer chance, or perhaps by Bumpy's design. He wasn't there that night, but one of Bumpy's childhood friends, a kid everyone called Smiley, was tending bar to pick up extra cash. Smiley took a stray bullet, trying to shield a waitress from the gunfire. He bled out on that checkered tile floor before help could reach him. When Bumpy got the news, he showed no rage to the messenger, no wild outburst. He just nodded and closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the hurt. Smiley had been like family. People who saw Bumpy that night said the look on his face made their hair stand on end. Not fury, but something colder. They say he quietly told one of his men, "Make sure his mama is taken care of. Whatever she needs, for as long as she needs." Then Bumpy disappeared into his office for the rest of the night alone. No one heard him say a word, but those close to him knew a line had been crossed. Dutch had drawn blood from someone Bumpy loved. There would be an answer. But it wouldn't be loud or reckless. That wasn't Bumpy's way. As the war scarred Harlem's nights, Bumpy moved with careful deliberation, like a chess master on a board full of live pieces. He counseled patience to his furious young soldiers. "We strike when it's right, not when we're mad," he told them. Meanwhile, Dutch Schultz was growing impatient. This was supposed to have been a quick takeover. Instead, weeks of skirmishes had passed and Harlem still defied him. Every time his men struck, Bumpy struck back smarter. Dutch's operations downtown were even feeling the strain. He had to divert more men and money uptown than he'd planned. And still progress was too slow. Dutch's temper flared hotter with each report of another failed gambit. One evening in late January, Dutch convened a meeting in a smoky back room of a speakeasy on West 50th Street. The surviving captains of his Harlem campaign gathered around a table littered with maps of uptown and half-empty gin glasses. A single bulb cast hard shadows on faces that had seen their share of bloodshed. Dutch's icy blue eyes swept over them as he poured himself a shot of whiskey. On the wall, the mounted head of a stag seemed to watch like a silent judge. Wiv tried the carrot and the stick. Dutch snarled, slamming back the whiskey in one swallow. His voice was a gravelly bark honed by years of shouting orders and obscenities. They didn't take the damn carrot, and our stick, well, it ain't big enough yet. He glared at Artie. No, nos, Vignoli, a bruiser whose nose had been flattened in a bar fight years ago. Artie had led the ill-fated Palm Cafe shooting, and now his arm hung in a sling, courtesy of a bullet from one of Bumpy's men during the escape. Artie shifted, uncomfortable under Dutch's stare. That Bumpy fella, he's got them coloreds believin'. He's some kind of hero. Artie muttered bitterly. They don't scare like the others did. They fight back. Dutch's jaw clenched at the mention of Bumpy's name. The Harlem upstart had become an obsession. Dutch leaned across the table, knuckles pressing into a map of Harlem streets. In the dim light, the scars on his face, legacies of childhood poverty and barroom brawls, looked like cracks in stone. I want this handled. Now, Dutch said, slow and deadly. He tapped a spot on the map, roughly where that jazz club basement would be. They have these little meetings, countin' their pennies. Fine, we'll make an example of the next one. All of 'em dead. That'll shut the rest up. Boss. Ventured another of his men, a wary jetaway driver everyone called Ticker, nervously rolling a coin between his fingers. We've been hitting them hard, but maybe we should call in some extra help. Word is, some of the Italians downtown ain't too happy with how this is draggin' on. Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano, they got interests in Harlem too, even if they let you take the lead. Dutch's eyes flashed. He didn't like suggestions that he needed help, especially not from those Italian mafia big shots. He considered himself every bit their equal, if not superior. I'm not asking those snakes for a damn thing. Dutch spat. This is my operation, my territory. They'll get their cut when I say so, after I've tamed that jungle. Ticker gulped and fell silent under Dutch's glare. Another lieutenant, hands stained from years of dirty work, spoke up gruffly, then maybe we try something different. If bullets ain't breaking Bumpy's crew fast enough, what about buying someone on the inside? Everyone's got a price, right? Dutch drummed his fingers on the oak table. He had indeed tried to find a traitor in Bumpy's camp, but Bumpy's people were annoyingly loyal. He'd dispatched feelers through intermediaries. Money quietly offered to anyone close to Bumpy who might bite. Nothing. Either they were all too scared of Bumpy to betray him, or, worse, they actually believed in him. The thought made Dutch sneer. Already tried that? He said curtly. No takers. Looks like Bumpy knows how to keep his pets fed. He nearly spat the words. Loyalty bought with community goodwill was something Dutch had never had use for. Fear was so much quicker. Dutch stubbed out his cigar in a glass ashtray with more force than necessary. Fine. If bribery wouldn't work and piecemeal hits hadn't worked, he'd escalate to something unmistakable. He announced his plan, voice cutting through the hush. We're sending a crew. A big one, and we're doing it right. 10 of our best, armed to the teeth. They'll hit one of these meetings where Johnson and his pals feel safe. Wipe them all out in one night. Bumpy, his bankers, whoever's there. We send them a Valentine they'll never forget. Dutch's lip curled at his own dark joke. It would be a massacre time to send shockwaves through Harlem. Valentine's Day was coming up, and Dutch always had a twisted sense of humor about these things. Around the table, his men exchanged looks. 10 men, it was rare to deploy such a heavy squad on one target in the city. It sounded like overkill. But that was exactly Dutch's point overwhelming force. 10 men, boss. Artie no, Nos asked, skeptical. That's a lot of heat for one raid. Cops'll swarm like flies after. Dutch fixed Artie with a withering stare. Let him. By the time the cops pull their pants up, we'll be ghosts, and Harlem will be ours. He spread his hands flat on the table, flattening the map beneath. You think 10's too many for one little uptown hood. Ask yourself how many we've lost already to that pint, sized Warlord.
5? 6?
More? His captains looked away, knowing the toll. Dutch's voice lowered, each word dripping venom. I'm done losing boys to this. We go in heavy and we end it. In one night. He started naming his picks for the squad, stabbing the air with a finger for each name. Mad Dog, we get him out of Jersey.
Tommy 2 guns.
I want him with those twin 45s. Icepick Freddy, he's been begging to carve someone up. Delaney, the demolitions guy, bring him in case we need to blast an exit. Lou Tate, the marksman, he can cover from a perch. The rest I'll leave to you to fill in, Dutch said, nodding at one of the older lieutenants to gather additional reliable shooters. These ain't kids we're sending. These are shooters who earned their stripes. Bumpy's crew won't know what hit M. The men around the table nodded, grim smiles forming. The thought of unleashing such firepower appealed to their bloodlust. Finally, they'd squash Bumpy Johnson like the bug Dutch painted him to be. Dutch wasn't finished. He leaned in and lowered his voice, forcing them to listen carefully. We keep this quiet. No one breathes a word until it's go time. And when it's done, we leave one man alive. Just one to crawl back and tell the tale of what happened, to spread the fear. His eyes glittered as he imagined it. He could see the headlines already mass ISACRE, RLEM. The public would read it as just another gangland bloodbath, shake their heads, move on. But the underworld would know. They'd say Dutch Schultz took out Bumpy Johnson and his whole crew in one night. His name would ring out from New York to Philly as the man who broke Harlem. And any of those Harlem holdouts still alive would either fall in line or flee, terrified they'd be next. The plan was bold, brutal, and about as subtle as a sledgehammer. But subtlety wasn't Dutch's style, nor what this moment called for, in his view. He felt a savage satisfaction as he laid it out. This was how you dealt with defiance, crush it utterly, make an example so fearsome no one dares copy it. His lieutenants saw his mind was set. They murmured assent and started discussing logistics, timing, routes, arms. The hit would take place in mid-February, on a Friday night when the bankers traditionally gathered to tally the week's intake. They pinpointed a likely target, an old jazz club on the 145th that had been converted into a makeshift counting house on certain nights. Their informant said Bumpy often met his people in different spots each week, but patterns emerge. There were only so many safe places large enough for the operation. Dutch was gambling that, on the chosen night, Bumpy would be at this club with enough of his inner circle to make the strike worthwhile. As Dutch's captains hashed out details, one asked quietly, "And what about after? Bumpy's not the only one up there." "Madame St. Clair, others they'll still have loyalists." Dutch waved a dismissive hand. "Cut off the head and the body dies. We take out Bumpy and his key men, the rest'll scatter or fall in line. That old lady St. Clair, she's nothing without Johnson doing the dirty work." He checked his watch, already moving on in his mind. "All right. Get your men. Over the next 2 weeks, bring M in one by one and keep him at the safe house in the Bronx. Low profile. We'll get them police badges or uniforms if we need, to move uptown without hassle." He even considered disguises, maybe pose as a police raid to slip a large armed group into Harlem without raising alarms. The irony of using the law's image to do his dirt made him grin. "We'll go over final details day before." "Now get to work," Dutch said, dismissing them. The decision was made. 10 men to erase Bumpy Johnson from Harlem's story. All those gangsters left that room believing they'd agreed to a necessary brutality. One that would soon tilt the war decisively in their favor. What none of them knew was that even as they plotted in secret, word was already seeping through the underworld grapevine. It's nearly impossible to gather a small army in New York without anyone noticing. Dutch's crew tried to keep it quiet, but a few extra gunslingers hanging around a Bronx safe house drew attention from local lowlifes, and thus it raised questions. And questions in the underworld have a way of finding answers when the right ears are listening. Bumpy Johnson had ears everywhere, not in the obvious places. He didn't bother spying around Dutch's well, guarded downtown clubhouses. No, Bumpy paid attention to the people Dutch's men overlooked, the Shushin boy in the lobby of Dutch's favorite hotel, who overheard things whenever gangsters forgot a child was polishing their shoes, the janitor in an office building where one of Dutch's front businesses had an office. He'd sometimes find crumpled notes in the trash about shipments, or new hires, and pass them along. The teenage cabbie who had cousins running errands in Dutch's neighborhood and kept tabs on unusual visitors. Bumpy had quietly cultivated a network of ordinary folks who saw and heard things all over the city. He paid them modestly but fairly, sometimes in cash, sometimes in favors, like getting a relative a job or ensuring the cops looked the other way on a cousin's minor charge. Loyalty, respect, community. Those were Bumpy's currencies. So it was that in early February, about 2 weeks before Dutch's planned D-Day, Bumpy got a phone call at 2 a.m. Detective Wilbur Thompson, one of Bumpy's allies in the NYPD, was on the line with an urgent warning. He'd caught wind that Dutch was recruiting an unusually large crew of out-of-town hitters, maybe 10 men in total, for an imminent strike on Harlem. Got a bad feeling about this. You watch yourself? Thompson warned. Bumpy thanked him and hung up. For a long moment, Bumpy sat at the counter of that late-night diner, coffee growing cold in front of him, absorbing what he'd just learned. If Dutch was bringing in 10 hitmen, it meant Dutch was through testing the waters. He was going for a kill strike. Bumpy's mind raced over the possibilities. 10 men could do a lot of damage. They could hit multiple targets at once, or concentrate on one spot to annihilate it. Either way, it spelled a bloodbath if he didn't act. By the time Bumpy stepped back out into the icy early morning streets, he had already resolved on a course of action. He wouldn't wait to react to Dutch's move, and he wouldn't try to counter it with similar brute force. No, if Dutch wanted to send 10 of his best into Harlem, Bumpy would make sure those 10 men walked straight into their grave. He'd set a trap so enticing and so lethal that they'd never see it coming until it was too late, and he'd do it on his terms, on Harlem's terms. The next day, Bumpy quietly put his plan into motion. He met with Illinois' Gordon in the back of an empty barbershop, where a friendly barber kept watch at the front and ran the scissors loudly to mask their conversation. Illinois was Bumpy's most trusted strategist, sharp-eyed, level-headed, and as loyal as they come. When Bumpy laid out what he suspected Dutch was planning, Illinois gave a low whistle. 10 men. That's heavy, he said, brows knitting together. We can't fight that head-on bump. Not without a lot of bodies. Bumpy nodded. I know. We won't meet them head-on. We'll pull them in nice and quiet. Make them think they found a weakness. The 2 men began sketching out the skeleton of a scheme. They'd need to feed Dutch's side some information. Something Dutch would latch on to. Bumpy had an idea for that. For weeks he had deliberately been changing up meeting spots as Dutch's men knew. But what if Dutch were convinced he'd found out the next big meeting place in advance? They would make it look like Dutch's informants got lucky. A slip-up that wasn't a slip-up at all. There was an old jazz club on the 145th Street, closed down 2 years back when the owner went broke. It still had a working basement space, often used for after-hours dice games. Bumpy had quietly used it once or twice for small meets, nothing big. He decided that would be the stage for Dutch's downfall. The Magnolia Club? Illinois asked, surprised. Place only got one exit out the basement. It's a tomb if you get cornered. Bumpy gave a thin smile. Exactly. A tomb for them. We make sure that's where they come. And we make sure they don't leave. Bumpy set about planting the bait. He knew of at least one stool pigeon likely feeding Dutch info, an underling of St. Clair's who'd been acting jumpy lately, probably figuring Dutch might reward him if he leaks something useful. Rather than expose and punish the man just yet, Bumpy decided to use him. Bumpy convened a hush meeting of his key bankers at an unusual time and place so that this underling would hear of it, a midday gathering at an open-air market, sounding like an impromptu thing to discuss, moving the week's counting to a new location. The Magnolia Club, on the upcoming Friday night. He spoke loud enough for the suspected snitch to overhear details, that a lot of money would be on hand, that Bumpy himself would be present, but with only minimal guards to keep things low. Keese. We don't want Dutch hearing about this one. Bumpy said in a stage whisper the snitch could catch. Illinois played along, raising concerns for effect. Is that basement big enough? And secure? We won't have our usual muscle around, he said, just loud enough to be overheard. Bumpy waved a hand as if unconcerned, also deliberately audible. It'll do for one night. The fewer people know, the better. We don't want any surprises. The trap was baited with a reverse psychology flourish. Sure enough, within 48 hours, Bumpy's sources confirmed that Dutch's people were sniffing around the Magnolia Club, an Italian ice vendor on the corner across from the club. One of Bumpy's paid watchers reported seeing two well-dressed white men he didn't recognize checking out the front of the shuttered club one afternoon, trying to peer through the boarded windows. They didn't go in, but they circled the block slowly in a car twice. Dutch's scouts were doing their work. Bumpy carried on as if everything was normal. He still shuffled his real banker meetings from place to place that week, making no mention of Magnolia, except in contexts the snitch could pick up. The snitch delivered as expected. Dutch swallowed the bait. Bumpy heard via his grapevine that Dutch's crew set the datey Friday, February 14th. The irony of it, Valentine's Day, was not lost on Bumpy. Some whispered Dutch was styling himself after Al Capone, who orchestrated the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago 4 years prior. If Dutch wanted a Harlem Valentine's Day massacre, Bumpy would oblige. Just not in the way Dutch intended. In the days leading up, Bumpy quietly stockpiled what he'd need. He moved crates of weapons into the Magnolia Club's basement. Shotguns, rifles, plenty of ammunition. Little by little. Smuggled in via a back alley door late at night. He had an electrician friend rig the basement lights to a special switch upstairs so they could be killed all at once at the right moment, and another switch to a reserve light that would come on later on his cue. They reinforced one of the storage rooms adjoining the basement with sandbags and old mattresses behind the walls, creating a fortified position where a couple of Bumpy shooters could duck for cover and still keep firing. They set up makeshift cover, overturned heavy tables, at 2 positions that commanded the room, though they would just look like abandoned furniture until needed. As for sealing the exit, Bumpy assigned a trusted man, Knuckles, Evans, to be lookout outside. The moment Dutch's crew entered the basement, Knuckles would quietly padlock the outer door behind them and then station himself with a Browning rifle across the street to pick off any who might manage to break out a window. It was a deadly box Dutch's men would be walking into, and Bumpy planned to nail it shut. Thursday night, on the eve of the showdown, Bumpy did something unusual. He sent most of his regular lieutenants out of the city on trivial errands. It was partly to ensure there was a fallback leadership if things went awry, and partly to keep any more leaks from reaching Dutch that something was off. He kept only Illinois and a handful of fighters in the loop, mostly younger guys with everything to prove an unshakable loyalty. If anyone questioned why Bumpy and a select few were hanging out in a derelict club on a Friday, the cover story was that they were making a big pickup of cash from a new uptown source. Need to know only. The trust Bumpy placed in these few bound them to him with unspoken reverence. They knew they were about to stand against Dutch's deadliest. 10 men with reputations like reapers, and yet none flinched from the duty. Some were scared, sure, but as Illinois distributed extra guns from the stash and Bumpy walked them through the plan, each man nodded in determination. They weren't just doing this for Bumpy, they were doing it for Harlem. Each one had someone or something to protect, family, friends, their own stake in the neighborhood's future. If Dutch took over, all that was in jeopardy. So if Bumpy Johnson said this was the way, they would see it through or die trying. The night of February 14th arrived, bitter cold with a dusting of snow swirling under the streetlights. Inside the Magnolia Club's basement, Bumpy's crew set the stage. They arranged dummies, old suits stuffed with pillows and straw. Around the central table, even placing fedoras on a few to make their silhouettes convincing. A couple of phonograph records were selected to play on a gramophone to simulate the casual atmosphere of a counting party. They chose Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway tunes, lively enough to mask small noises of the ambushers taking positions, but not so loud as to alert the approaching gunmen too soon. Bumpy insisted on one more touch, a bottle of good whiskey, and some glasses on the table, as if an interrupted celebration. It added to the illusion, and he thought grimly it was a fitting way to mark what was about to happen on this so-called holiday. Just after 11:30 p.m., Bumpy gathered his 6 hand-picked men in a tight circle in the center of that basement. He looked each in the eye. In the dim light, the whites of their eyes flashed with resolve. "This isn't just for us," Bumpy said quietly, voice steady as a rock. "It's for every mother and kid trying to sleep safe on these blocks tonight. It's for Smiley, and for all the ones Dutch's boys have hurt. We end it here." Illinois, holding a shotgun across his body, finished the thought like a prayer, "So Harlem can breathe free." A murmur of assent went around. They broke apart, each man moving to his station. Illinois and a crack shot named Leon took the loft space above a storage alcove, giving them a bird's-eye angle. 2 young guns, J.C. and Roy, tucked behind the overturned tables at opposite corners, covering the floor. An older war veteran, Pop Harris, hunkered down with a Winchester in the sandbagged side room, which had a narrow firing slit cleverly made by removing a few bricks, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. And Bumpy himself chose to stand just behind a structural pillar near the stairs, a .45 in his hand and a Thompson resting against the wall, ready. Bumpy would let his men unleash the first volley, but he wanted to be there face to face at the critical moment. This was as much his fight as anyone's. He adjusted his fedora and checked his pocket watch. 11:45 p.m. Everything was ready. Lights. He whispered, read the electrician, perched by the stairs, nodded, and flipped the rigged switch. The basement went pitch black, except for a faint glow from a low, hooded lamp near Bumpy that was hidden from the entrance. They were in darkness, waiting for their unwelcome guests. Outside, on the quiet street, Knuckles Evans watched from a shadowed doorway, collar turned up against the chill. At 1:45 midnight, he whistled once, a soft bird call, to signal what they all knew anyway. Dutch's men would be here any minute. Bumpy waited, calm, breathing slow and deep. He had done everything possible to stack the odds in their favor. Now it came down to execution and a bit of luck. At 11:57 p.m., Bumpy heard the creak of the outside door opening. Dutch's men filed in, footsteps echoing down the corridor toward the basement hall. Bumpy's finger slid onto the trigger of his .45, but he held fire. Not yet. Let them come in fully. He could hear faint whispers. Someone hissing, "Shh." Another voice cursing under his breath as a foot struck something in the dark hallway. They were trying to be stealthy, but the old building betrayed them with every creak and scuff. Bumpy pictured their positions from the sounds. Likely a leader up front, others fanning behind. His heart thumped steadily, each beat measured. He felt a strange calm, almost detached. The fear was there. Only a fool wouldn't feel fear facing what's coming. But years on the streets had taught him to cage that fear, to channel it. The first silhouette darkened the open archway to the basement. Through a slight gap in the boarded window, enough light trickled in for Bumpy to make out a figure with a hat and the long shape of a Tommy gun. That would be Mad Dog, he thought. The infamous trigger man from Jersey. Bumpy had heard of him. An unpredictable killer rumored to keep a tally of his murders. Tonight that tally would end. More shapes slid in behind. Bumpy counted 2, 4, 6. They kept coming. 9, and yes, a 10th. All in, like rats drawn to cheese. He held his breath, listening as they spotted the decoys at the table and took the bait. Mad Dog's gruff whisper, "Light 'em up." Then the thunder of gunfire. Bumpy's jaw tightened at the sound of carnage, even though this time it was fake. It reminded him of the Palm Cafe, of Smiley's death, of every innocent terrorized by such violence. His resolve hardened to steel. The gunfire ceased. He heard confused voices. Someone exclaiming softly at the lack of blood. That was his cue. Bumpy tapped the butt of his gun twice against the pillar. An agreed signal. Red hit the master switch by the stairs. Instantly, the single lit bulb cut out, plunging the intruders into chaos. Bumpy heard one of them shout, "It's a trap!" confirming their fear. He smiled grimly in the dark. Right on cue outside, Knuckles swung the heavy padlock across the door latch and locked it firm. The click echoed faintly down into the basement. The mice were now sealed in the maze, and then Bumpy gave the second signal, a sharp whistle. The basement erupted in fury as his men opened fire from their hidden positions. The ambush was swift and devastating, as planned. Within less than a minute, it was over. Bumpy held up a hand, and his men ceased fire. Ears rang in the sudden silence. Red flipped on the secondary light. As the amber glow unveiled the slaughter, Bumpy stepped out from behind the pillar and surveyed the scene. Exactly as we saw earlier, the bodies of Dutch's elite crew-strewn across the basement, the smell of gunpowder and blood merging with stale cigar smoke. Bumpy's men emerged slowly, rifles still at the ready, checking for any signs of life among the attackers. None. It was done. 10 men came in, and 10 men were down. Bumpy nodded to his crew. That was the last of them. A couple of his men were panting, adrenaline still coursing. Roy had a graze along his forearm where a bullet had nearly found him. He wrapped it with a rag, hands shaking from the rush of survival. Illinois descended from the loft, reloading by habit though there was nothing left to shoot. They exchanged glances with Bumpy, glances that confirmed what they all felt: immense relief and a grim realization. It was over. Dutch's grand play had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. Bumpy gave a short nod to each of his crew. "You all did good," he said quietly. In those words was pride and gratitude. Each man had risked everything and shown unwavering courage. They had proven something tonight. But Bumpy's mind was already moving ahead. They couldn't just dump these bodies in the river like any other gang hit. No, this needed to send a message loud and clear, one that Dutch and everyone else in the underworld would hear without a doubt. "Let's send them back where they came from," Bumpy said, voice cold. He nodded at the carnage, boxed them up. Illinois and the others hoisted each lifeless attacker up, one by one, and laid them across the large central table where moments earlier stuffed decoys had sat. Now the real corpses took their place. It was a macabre scene, the men who had come to kill sitting around, as if convened for a final meeting of their own, heads lolling, eyes vacant. These were the boogeymen Dutch had sent to scare Harlem. And here they were. Bumpy had no desire to gloat. Death was death. Instead, what he felt was grim affirmation. Harlem would not be conquered. Not tonight, not by the likes of Dutch. He told Knuckles to bring the trucks. They had prepared for this too. 2 covered trucks were parked a few blocks away. When Knuckles arrived, Bumpy's crew loaded the bodies into the back, careful to wrap them in sheets for now to avoid leaving a trail of gore. Bumpy himself helped heft the corpses. These dead men were his message now, and he oversaw every detail of how that message would be delivered. Before they sealed the last body bag, Bumpy paused over Mad Dog's corpse. He reached into Mad Dog's coat and found what he expected: a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he saw a crudely drawn map of Harlem with the Magnolia Club marked, and a list of names, likely targets, including his own. Beside Bumpy Johnson was scribbled 100K, the bounty they'd been promised. Bumpy shook his head and slipped the paper into his pocket. Proof, if ever needed, of Dutch's intentions. By 2 a.m., the trucks rolled out quietly, carrying all 10 bodies. Bumpy rode in the passenger seat of the first truck, eyes forward, silent as Illinois drove. They headed downtown, crossing out of Harlem's streets without fanfare. Just another late night delivery. In the second truck behind, the rest of Bumpy's crew sat with the grisly cargo, guns on their laps just in case. But the night remained still. No one stopped them, no one even noticed in the wee hours before dawn. They arrived at a warehouse Dutch owned near the Hudson, a liquor depot still active even with Prohibition ending. The trucks eased to a halt at the loading bay. A lone night guard, half dozing by a barrel fire to ward off the cold, looked up confused to see 2 trucks at this hour. He wandered over, scratching his head. Illinois was already out of the cab, leveling a pistol at the man's face before he could speak. The guard's hands shot up, eyes bulging in fear. Bumpy emerged and spoke in a low voice, almost polite, quiet now. "We're just here to deliver a message to your boss." Under Bumpy's direction, the 2 trucks were positioned at the loading doors. They hauled out each corpse and placed them into empty wooden crates that Illinois had arranged to have ready inside the warehouse. 10 crates, like shipping cargo. One by one, the lifeless assassins were laid to rest in their temporary coffins. The guard stood by shaking, forced to assist under Roy's watchful gun. He didn't dare ask questions, but tears streamed down his face by the time he placed the last of his former comrades into a box. Some of these men he had known by name. Bumpy fished a stub of pencil from his coat. On each crate he scrawled a number in bold strokes 1 through 10. Then, on the side of the top crate, he wrote in a steady hand, "From Harlem, with love." It was a dark echo of Dutch's Valentine plan delivered back to sender. He turned to the trembling guard and spoke quietly, almost gently. "Call your boss. Tell him to come to the warehouse. Now, he'll want to see this." The guard frantically nodded and scrambled to the office phone as soon as Bumpy's men released him. Bumpy and his crew didn't stick around to face Dutch directly. That wasn't part of the plan, and it would risk turning a victory message into an ongoing shootout. Their work was done. By the time Dutch's headlights were on the horizon, Bumpy and his men were long gone into the fading night, heading back uptown. Dutch arrived at his warehouse half an hour later in a fury, roused from a fitful slumber by the panicked phone call. He brought 15 men, all he could gather on short notice. They stormed into the warehouse expecting an enemy ambush, but what they found instead stopped them cold. The only ambush was emotional 10 crates laid out in a row, reeking of death. Dutch's heart hammered as he pried open the first lid. There lay the corpse of Mad Dog, eyes glassy, a neat bullet hole dead center in his forehead. Dutch's vision swam. He opened another crate. Tommy 2, guns, riddled with wounds. Another, Ice Pick Freddy, half his chest missing. Each crate a horror, a loss beyond calculation. As Dutch stared at the macabre cargo, one of his lieutenants wordlessly handed him the scrawled note from the side of a crate. "From Harlem, with love." Dutch's face contorted. His skin went ashen, then flushed crimson with rage. In that moment, Dutch Schultz felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, fear laced with humiliation. Bumpy Johnson had outplayed him completely, turned his grand strike into a devastating loss. Dutch's men looked to him in dread, some crossed themselves or whispered in shock as they recognized the bodies. The Underworld had rarely seen a message this brazen. 10 of Dutch's best, killed and delivered back like returned merchandise. Dutch clenched his fists so hard his knuckles cracked. He swept an arm across a table, sending barrels of bootleg booze crashing to the ground in an explosion of glass and liquor. His mind raced. All the money spent, the planning, his top killers gone. And Bumpy Johnson still lived. No more than that, Bumpy had proven himself a force to be reckoned with. Dutch's legs felt like lead. He forced himself to bark orders. "Get these bodies out of sight. We can't let the cops find this," he commanded. His men jumped to obey, but they moved with a collective shock. One of Dutch's confidants, a gangster named Joey No, shoe sever for his penchant for soft Italian loafers over the usual boots, whispered to another as they hauled a crate, "We can't go back in there, not without an army." Dutch overheard. Ordinarily, he'd have lashed out for such perceived cowardice. But tonight, he could not entirely disagree. An army, maybe that's what it would take. Or maybe even an army would fail if Bumpy saw it coming. Even now, decades later, they still tell the tale in Harlem today, as a warning to anyone who thinks they can take on Harlem, and when Dutch Schultz sent 10 men to take Harlem, and Bumpy Johnson sent them back in 10 coffins. By the next morning, every major crime boss in New York had heard about the 10 coffins delivered straight to Dutch's doorstep. Reportedly with a note that read, "From Harlem, with love." Dutch himself rushed to the warehouse before dawn, pried open one of the crates, and found his best enforcer staring back at him with lifeless eyes. In that moment, the man who had once terrified New York felt terror of his own. Lucky Luciano and his fellow mob kingpins convened and decided Dutch's Harlem War was a losing proposition. Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson. One of them admitted. None of them wanted to lose more men or money, trying to fight a man who always seemed a step ahead. Dutch was furious at being told to back off, but he had little choice. The commission quietly withdrew any support for his takeover. It was an unprecedented retreat, perhaps the first time New York's mafia had quietly conceded territory to a black crime boss without a final war. Dutch left that meeting livid and unsatisfied. In his heart, he wasn't done with Bumpy Johnson, not by a long shot. But now he was effectively muzzled by his own peers. Over the next weeks, Dutch's presence in Harlem receded. His surviving goons had no stomach for more direct attacks. Now they crossed 110th Street with superstition, as if entering cursed ground. Harlem's numbers bankers cautiously resumed business in the open. It seemed the storm had passed, and Bumpy Johnson, he emerged from this trial not just alive, but legendary. People who had never uttered his name above a whisper now spoke it with admiration. He'd done what no one thought possible, turned back one of the deadliest gangsters in America, and done it on Harlem's terms. They said he was a genius strategist, that he could see the future. Some claimed he must have infiltrated Dutch's inner circle to have known the Plan S in a way. They weren't wrong, but it wasn't clairvoyance. Just good intelligence and planning. Dutch Schultz never got another chance to claim Harlem. Later that year, his own hubris sealed his fate. Still smarting from the Harlem fiasco, Dutch made a fatal mistake. He openly talked about assassinating a prosecutor, Thomas Dewey, which enraged the higher-ups in the mafia who feared the law's backlash. In October 1935, before Dutch could regain his footing, he was cut down in a Newark tavern by hitmen, widely believed to be on orders from the commission itself. As Dutch lay dying in a hospital, delirious and babbling, one can only wonder if in his fevered dreams he saw the faces of those 10 men he'd sent uptown, and the calm, unyielding eyes of Bumpy Johnson staring back. Bumpy Johnson, on the other hand, went from strength to strength. With Dutch gone, Lucky Luciano eventually made a quiet alliance with Bumpy. Harlem's numbers game would run independently, with a cut going to Luciano's organization, but with Bumpy as the undisputed point man in Harlem. It was a partnership born not out of fear, but out of mutual respect and cold business sense. Luciano figured it was better to have Bumpy as an ally than an enemy after witnessing Dutch's failure. And Bumpy, pragmatic in his own right, accepted a deal that ensured peace and a degree of autonomy for his community. The tale of the 10 coffins became underworld lore. They called it the Harlem Valentine's Day Massacre, and unlike Chicago's infamous massacre, this one was seen as a victory of the underdog. In speakeasies and pool halls from Harlem to Hell's Kitchen, they'd whisper about that night. They'd say, "You don't try to take Harlem. Harlem lets you leave alive, if you're lucky." And often they'd end with the line that became almost proverbial, "Dutch sent 10 in, Bumpy sent him back in 10 coffins." It was both a warning and a boast. The message was clear: Harlem wasn't to be trifled with, and Bumpy Johnson was the man who ensured it. Bumpy himself seldom spoke of that night. He didn't need to. His actions had done the talking. When people thanked him or praised him for protecting the neighborhood, he'd simply nod and say, "Just doing what needed doing." For Bumpy, it was never about glory. It was about respect. Respect for Harlem, which meant keeping its people safe and free from outside domination. Years rolled on. Bumpy Johnson continued to rule Harlem's underworld into the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. He had ups and downs. He even did some prison time, but his legend only grew. Dutch Schultz became a cautionary footnote in mob history. A reminder that brute force could fail, that even the mightiest can fall if they don't respect the ground they're fighting on. And here's a final twist of fate: Bumpy Johnson outlived Dutch by over 3 decades. When Bumpy finally met his end in 1968, it wasn't an enemy's bullet that did him in. It was a heart attack right there in Harlem at a diner while having his usual breakfast of coffee and fried chicken livers. He collapsed at 62 years old, a grandfather and an icon. In the end, death came for Bumpy as a quiet thief in the form of natural causes, because no man ever managed to kill him. Not even when 10 of the deadliest men tried all at once. Now, what's the lesson in all this? Beneath the blood and bullets lies a truth about power. Real power isn't about having the biggest gun or the most men. It's about foresight and understanding. Dutch Schultz thought power was fear. He wielded it like a club, swinging wildly. Bumpy Johnson showed that true power is a scalpel, precise and smart. It's anticipating your enemy's moves, turning his strengths into his weaknesses. Bumpy played chess in a world of trigger, happy checker players. Dutch had built his empire on fear, but he ended up tasting fear himself at the hands of Bumpy's foresight. The most dangerous man in the room isn't the one waving a gun. It's the one who planned for every outcome before he even walked in. Dutch learned that lesson the hard way. He ruled by fear, but in the end he found himself fearing the man who could outthink him. Look, if this story got your heart racing and your mind ticking about the chess game of the underworld, do me a favor. Hit that like button real quick for Bumpy. It lets me know we're doing something right here. And if you're new around these parts, or even if you've been lurking, make sure to smash that subscribe button too. We're dropping deep, cut stories like this all the time, peeling back the layers on legends like Bumpy Johnson. And I gotta ask, was Bumpy ruthless or just necessary? How do you see it? Did he go too far, or was it exactly what had to be done to protect his people? Put yourself in Dutch Schultz's shoes for a second. Would you have sent those 10 men into Harlem, or was that the ultimate fool's errand? Drop a comment below with your thoughts and let me know. Was Bumpy ruthless or just necessary? Would you have sent those 10 men? Oh, and you definitely won't want to miss what's coming next week. We're going to dive into the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into Lucky Luciano's office unarmed and walked out with a deal that changed New York's underworld forever. Trust me, it's even crazier. In Harlem, they say the streets have their own code. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And as you've seen tonight, Bumpy Johnson earned it in every single way a man can. Until next time, stay smart, stay safe, and remember real power comes quietly.